सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen though.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to Macro Sutra. I am Y.P. Rajesh, Managing Editor at ThePrint, and I have Professor Radhika Pandey with me. She's from the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. We are into the second half of August. And why is second half of August significant for economy and economists? Because there is something called the festival season which begins around this time in India. Next week, or actually the end of August, is Ganesh Chaturthi, which is a very big festival in Western India and Southern India. After which there is Onam in Kerala. And then that leads to Dasera, Diwali, or Dasara as we call it in the south, Dashehra as they call it in the north, Diwali, which then goes on to Christmas, New Year. So August, September, October, November, December is a festival season. And that is a very big indicator of what consumers do. Companies wait for the festival season to sell new products, new launches. And all of that depends on how much confidence consumers have, how much demand there is from consumers, which is a big part of the economic cycle. And this year, because it was Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav last weekend, the festival season began even earlier, because those of you who get newspapers would have seen these huge full-page ads from consumer companies, from electronic companies, from the likes of Amazon, Flipkart, announcing their big sales during the Independence Day weekend. Top of that, we have got big headlines as we record this on a Thursday. Sales on Independence Day weekend went beyond the pre-COVID era. Another headline said retail sales remain robust. And a third headline said credit card sales in June and July this year were even better than Diwali last year, that is 2021. So what exactly is happening? Have Indian consumers become more confident? Are they spending money, or are they getting the confidence to spend money, which means the economy is looking up, is what we are going to discuss today with Radhika. Hi Radhika. Is this just coincidence, or is this actually something that shows that we are turning a corner? Just before we started recording this show, we also talked about a Morgan Stanley report which says that macroeconomic instability is now sort of coming to an end in India. Are these good signs? Or before we actually get there, how do you measure consumer confidence? What is consumer confidence?
So there are various surveys conducted to assess the consumer confidence. One is the survey which is conducted by the Reserve Bank of India. It's a survey conducted once every 2 months. Then there is a consumer sentiments survey conducted by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, the CMI, which is a monthly survey and also a weekly indicator of consumer sentiment. So primarily, if we look at the Reserve Bank of India's consumer confidence survey, what they are doing is they are asking consumers about their outlook for expenditure, for income, what do they anticipate about prices, inflation, how do they perceive about their employment going forward. So all of this makes up for consumer confidence, how they are looking forward about their, how do they feel about the flow of income, their spending, the state of the economy. Are they becoming more optimistic about the economic outlook? Are they becoming more optimistic that inflation is easing? So all of this makes up for consumer confidence. And what both of these indices primarily do is that they break this into two parts. One is the assessment of current economic conditions, and second is expectation about future. When we say expectation about future, it's not very far-fetched, it's expectation over the next 1 year. So those are that's the sum and total of consumer confidence or consumer sentiment, where people are asked about their outlook, and it's an assessment of both the current economic conditions and expectations.
Okay. So consumer sentiment and consumer confidence can be used interchangeably.
Yes.
It's the same thing.
Yes.
So from what we saw from the data you have presented in your column, which is published on Friday morning, and the link is there in the notes, what is changing?
So what is changing is in both the indices, if we look at the Reserve Bank of India's Consumer Confidence Index as well as the CMI's Index of Consumer Sentiments, we are seeing a sharp turnaround. Primarily, more particularly, if we look at the CMI's Index of Consumer Sentiment, we see that there is a sharp jump in July, around 6.5% jump, and this survey is conducted both for rural as well as urban consumers, and we see a much sharper jump for rural consumers. So it shows that there has been a turnaround. So it's not that this is the single most incident of turnaround. Consumer sentiments have been improving, but at a very slow pace. What we saw in July was that there was a sharp turnaround, and that is something to talk about because we need to see, is it due to some temporary factors, like is it due to some seasonal factors, like primarily in rural areas, is it due to rains, that because now southwest monsoon has picked up pace, in terms of long-term average, rains have progressed in July as compared to June. So we have seen pickup in sowing activity, agricultural laborers are getting employed. So is that the reason for improvement in sentiments, or is it going to be sustained? So that is something that we need to see going forward. But the encouraging point is that both rural and urban index of consumer sentiments have seen a sharp increase in July, and that is the same is the case for Reserve Bank of India's index, though in terms of magnitude it's relatively more subdued as compared to the CMI's index, because we are looking at both the current situation as well as the expectation. So while on some parameters consumers seem to be more optimistic, on some other parameters like income and on employment, they are still not that optimistic. So that has resulted in a growth, but not that encouraging growth that we see in the rural index of consumer sentiments.
What surprised me, Radhika, with these numbers is that rural is actually registered stronger growth than urban, because on the other hand we keep hearing that there is rural distress, the rains have not been as good as the people were expecting, or it should be in July, sowing has been disturbed and all of that, and Narega demand went up. So but you're saying, so the data is a little counterintuitive.
No, Narega's demand for July has gone down.
June it went up.
June it went up. So June, even consumer sentiments rose just by 1%. So if you see the CMI's consumer sentiment index, it rose hardly by 1% in June. So there were concerns that rains are patchy and consumer sentiments was weak, and that was getting reflected in increase in the demand for work under Manrega. But all of that has changed in July, and we are seeing a turnaround in both index of consumer sentiments as well as in Manrega. We are seeing that the demand for work has gone down. Now, it's a positive thing, because if the demand for work under Manrega goes down, that means there are other viable employment options available. They are employed either on agriculture, or there are other public works program going on in rural areas. And also that the reverse migration that happened during the pandemic is now actually reversing, and people are migrating back to urban areas, to cities. So that's what we are seeing in terms of the data.
So this data, again, I go back to my point of how is this measured separately by the RBI and CMI. I know we had an interview with CMI's Mahesh Vyas very recently in our off-the-cuff show, where he had talked about how they have people around the country where they go around doing door-to-door surveys. How does the RBI do this? Do we know how RBI does this?
Yeah, so RBI's survey is primarily urban. So they do this survey for 19 cities for around 5,000 to 6,000 households around across 19 cities. They do this survey, and so they do two kinds of surveys. So one is this consumer confidence survey, the other is the inflation expectation survey. So both the surveys has the same universe of frame for population. Primarily the urban. So that's why this kind of rural-urban divide that we are seeing, or the contrast that we are seeing, very sharp jump in rural sentiments that we are seeing in the CMI's data set, because there we get the rural and urban. And if we just in terms of numbers. During the pandemic, consumer sentiments, the CMI's consumer sentiments dropped to almost 40, 41, and it was, pre-pandemic, it was above 100, the index value, and now we are in the range of 70, 71. So what we need to understand here is that those sentiments have picked up. We are still quite below the pre-pandemic. But can
you explain that number when you say it is 40, 41, 70, 71, above 100?
Yeah.
What does it measure? For people, lay people who don't know this index?
Yes, so it's just like any other index number which has a base year. Here the base year is 2015. So reference base year is 2015, so that is taken as 100. So in comparison to 2015, what is happening to the index values, or what's happening to the sentiment? So they they ask a lot of questions, and then they average around, come up with a value, and then they measure that with reference to 2015. So 2015 is taken as 100. Anything above 100 means that your index value is above the 2015 value. So again, just in terms of numbers, I mentioned that just to get a sense of, okay, consumer sentiment is improving, but still this number is quite below the pre-pandemic period.
What does 100 denote? What happened in 2015 that it became 100? I mean, what is 100? What does 100 mean?
100 is just like when we talk about the index number, we have to take something as a reference point. So 2015, 2015, one particular month becomes the reference point, and then they measure from that value, that taking something as 100, what is the value of, say, in 2016, that is benchmark to 100 to get a comparison. So that is what they do.
And then you talk about consumer demand, which is different from sentiment and confidence. Can you explain consumer demand? How is it different from confidence and sentiment?
So consumers sentiments, consumer demand, these are all interlinked. When consumers are demanding, that means that they are becoming more optimistic. There is an improvement in their income. That is why they are spending. So it may be that their income levels have improved. They have become more optimistic about their employment, their job security, and that is why they are spending. So if they are spending, if they are buying more passenger vehicles, if in rural areas, if they are buying more scooters, that is again an indirect assessment of consumer sentiments and consumer confidence. So indicators of consumer demand also need to be seen in conjunction with consumer confidence. Again, if we look at, and it's not that consumer demand has been rising, it's rising only very recently. If we look at the GDP numbers, the January to March GDP number, we saw that consumption was actually muted. And if we look at the various components of GDP, spending side, consumption, investment, government spending, investment had picked up, but consumption was still very sluggish. So therefore, it's very important to see that after the Omicron wave has ebbed and after this economic uncertainty is slowly moderating, what's happening to consumer demand.
And here you have noted or actually found, Radhika, that indicators of rural demand have remained muted, which is, again, earlier we said it grew, confidence grew, but rural demand has remained muted. I mean, isn't that a contradiction?
No, so it had been muted all throughout, but in July they are picking up. Let us just look at, if we look at July, July was a month which saw a turnaround in index of consumer sentiment, in consumer confidence, and some of the indicators of rural demand have also picked up. Some of the indicators of rural distress have eased in July, particularly the Manrega demand for work has eased. So we are talking about July. That's why I'm saying that till January to March, and even after that, rural demand had not picked up, and there was this concern. Even now there is concern. It's just that there are some green shoots of recovery that we are seeing in rural demand in the month of July. And it may well be that these are just seasonal factors, maybe due to the fact that monsoons have picked up, and maybe after that there will again be, we will again see subdued performance of rural demand. But in July we did see, and that is what we are talking about in this piece.
And there is obviously a very strong correlation with jobs, and you're saying the signals are very mixed on the job front.
Yes.
So what's happening there?
So again, consumer demand, jobs, consumer sentiments, because in your consumer confidence also people are asked about their job outlook. So one reflection about job market is through Manrega. There we are seeing that because the demand for work under Manrega is easing, that means people are getting viable job options elsewhere. That is one part. The other is that the CMI's unemployment rate, which is the proportion of the labor force that is willing to work but has not found work. So that is the unemployment rate definition. So that has gone down in the month of July overall. But again, if we look at rural and urban, the decline is primarily due to rural. It's the rural joblessness has gone down. Urban has slightly picked up. So there also we are seeing again mixed signals that though overall the joblessness or unemployment rate has gone down, but that is primarily due to rural. So we are seeing in July is primarily a rural story because of the pickup of southwest monsoon, because of advancement in sowing activity, because of people moving from rural to urban areas for jobs, and therefore the pressure on Manrega going down. So that is what is the story in the rural sector. And also if we look at the occupation wise, so if you look at the CMI's data on index of consumer sentiment, they also give occupation wise index of consumer sentiment, and there also we see that farmers have got the maximum increase in consumer sentiment. So that is something that is a cause of it's an encouraging sign, because till now we were seeing the rural distress, wages being depressed, and now another factor is that crop prices have increased. We have seen that wheat prices have increased, MSP has been increased, and therefore and input prices, even fertilizers prices have increased, but there the government has supported through fertilizer subsidy. So all these factors are giving some kind of a fillip to the rural economy. But again, the question is whether these would be sustained or not. But given that we have a festive season, given that your contact intensive services are reopening, we should see an improvement going forward.
Also, a lot depends on how we are already into August, so the monsoon is 2.5 months done, and September is when the monsoon starts withdrawing. Although we don't know how it will play out this year, because last year it went into October. And sowing and the
all
monsoon patterns will make a very strong impact on rural demand and sentiment. And the last part is of course retail credit, and you say that is doing very, very well, and the banks and credit card companies and the home loan companies should be very happy.
Very happy. So we saw that retail spending is picking up. People are buying by using their credit card, and all this data is also getting reflected in the sectoral deployment of bank credit data, which is released by the Reserve Bank of India. So if we see the pandemic time, there was a decline in the demand for credit, but now we are seeing credit is picking up. Credit by industry is also picking up. but the main driver of credit growth is the personal loan segment. And within the personal loan segment, the composition is extremely important. If we look at the pandemic time, the personal loan was driven by loans against gold jewelry. That time households were pledging their gold in order to borrow for medical expenses, for precautionary motives, and because their incomes would have collapsed. So in addition to borrowing through informal sources, people were borrowing through by pledging against gold. So that was the main driver of personal loan growth during 2020 and 21. But now what we are seeing is that the other components of personal loans are picking up, like housing loan has picked up. The loans against for consumer durables has picked up. So when these kinds of loans pick up, that indicate that discretionary spending is rising.
And mind you, this is when rates are going up.
This is when rates are going up, and there is people are saying that despite rates going up, we do not expect a considerable suppression in credit demand, because companies had a lot of liquidity. So particularly for interest sensitive sectors like housing, real estate, while interest rate will have a hike will have an impact, but given that inflation has started easing, there is expectation that going forward the magnitude of interest rate hikes won't be too high. In place of 50 basis points, there would be 25 or 35 basis points. So all these are giving a positive outlook to the credit market.
Which is why even the stock markets are going gaga and climbing every day for the last week or 10 days.
Yeah, and even retail are also investing, consumers are investing in the equity market. If you see, the FPIs withdrew, but the retail segments trust in the equity market continued, and that we saw in the mutual funds data also.
Yeah, fantastic. So what is our last question for the day, Radhika, for this episode? How do you see this festival season panning out, especially when we go towards Dussehra and Diwali and the end of the year? You see these numbers, these sentiment numbers and these demand numbers going up?
Yes, especially because now what these FMCG companies, what they are doing is, as you mentioned, sales, but in addition for the poorer or lower strata of people, they are coming up with something like value packaging and all. So they are trying to capitalize on the festive season. So the spending is definitely going to rise. Also because for car sales, the input cost bottlenecks that we saw previously, the chip shortage has eased. So now people have got the opportunity to buy cars. So we saw a record sales of passenger vehicles. Scooter sales have picked up. So we should see that going forward. And particularly 2 years have been very brutal. And now there's also this talk about revenge shopping, that now we will go out and we will shop.
Go on holidays.
We will go on holidays. We will do window shopping, whatever, but we will go out, and that is what we are seeing. Another important factor, the Naukri.com comes up with something called a job market index, and there also we are seeing that hotels and all these contact intensive services, they are anticipating a big increase in recruitment because they are picking up. There is increase in demand. So all these factors cumulatively should lead to improvement in consumer confidence.
Fantastic. So that's a great way to end this episode, Radhika. And as we go into Ganesh Chaturthi, Onam, Dussehra, Diwali, all of that, we only hope that this sentiment grows and economic recovery gathers pace, or as Morgan Stanley says, macroeconomic stability gets stronger. Thank you for watching this episode of Macro Sutra. We will be back with another new one next week. And until then, have a good weekend. Stay safe.